I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. It is great to be with you here on this Saturday. Hopefully you had yourself a great week and you got done the things needed to get done. Hopefully you got some rain where you need it. And hopefully Mother Nature gave a bit of a pause if you feel like you got a little bit too much. So we are definitely in the midst of the growing season. I continue to hear farmers say to me across the prairies, this crop is moving. Now, in some cases, not very happy with what they're seeing in some of the really dry spots. And in others, people are like, hey, we're still okay. But it is a bit of a scattered mess, if you do know what I mean. Now, today on RealAg on the Weekend, cover a number of different topics. We're going to look at the May results for the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. I've got some thoughts for you that are a little bit, we're definitely seeing a move to the pessimistic side in terms of how Canadian farmers are looking at this current situation, trying to steer through all the variables. And we're really seeing a drop in the area of crop marketing in terms of their outlook on where the market is going and their confidence in trying to steer through that. So we'll talk about that today. We're also going to hit on what's going on with Viterra and Bunge and get a bit of an update on that. We're also going to talk about the battle over interswitching. We're seeing a lot of lobbying right now from farm groups as well as from the railway industry, and they're not on the same page. And both trying to make sure that policymakers understand the critical decision that is in front of them when it comes to interswitching. Kelvin Hepner from RealAgriculture will be here to discuss that. And then I want to hit on a question that a topic I have on the agenda for next week, which is talking about whether or not Canada needs to have a national plan for trade infrastructure. I'll be talking to Carlo Date from the Canada West Foundation next week. And I want to pose the situation to you and then hopefully get some questions from you that we can pose to Carlo. Okay? I'm looking forward to that. I love talking to Carlo Date from Canada West. And I want you to kind of participate in that interview by sending some thoughts and some questions as well. Now, speaking of thoughts, suggestions, questions, points of view, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's dive into the results of the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index for May. What we have seen is a definite slide in how you feel about your... Now, I should actually back up here. So what the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is every 2 months, Real Agri Studies asks you, the farmer, a 2-minute, you complete a 2-minute survey. And what it allows us to do is put together an index to provide, I think, better information to the marketplace and to other farmers, the farmer in general, in terms of how farmers are looking at the current situation. And definitely what you're telling, I think, from May is farmers are concerned about the financial situation. And part of that is probably, concern over what happens with input prices. Definitely what happens with the market, as we've seen it really slide. Definitely some good days this week, though. But the other part is just increased costs, like for machinery, like the squeezing in the margin. Okay, so when you look at current farm financial performance, we're about neutral. Now, we were positive, though, through January and March. So we've basically back to neutral when it comes to May. So farmers feeling neutral about how their current farm financial performance compares to today versus 12 months ago. When we look at future farm financial performance, this is where, now this number has always, through all of the surveys that we've done, is the future farm financial performance is always more negative than the current farm financial performance. So farmers really always unsure about the future so far in our survey. Now, what we've seen in terms of future farm financial performance in May is a pretty good drop off. Out of 200, the rating is 74. So farmers quite concerned, especially relative to how they felt back in March, feeling quite negative at 74 versus 2 months ago, 87. So, what have we seen in that time period? Well, I think it's kind of a deterioration of the commodity market and a lot of concern about what's happening with the global economy. So that's a factor. Now, when it comes to optimism towards the Canadian ag economy, this is where it's actually a 54 out of 200. That's a slide back from 81 in March. So in the last 2 months, how farmers view the current Canadian ag economy has really slid. Okay? So you can feel this pessimism out there. The farmers are feeling quite unsure right now. And you know what? Everybody in a different geo, like whether you're in Ontario or you're in Saskatchewan, you're going to have different reasons potentially why you feel that way. But it doesn't matter. All in all, as an aggregate, there's a lot of concern out there. Okay? A lot of concern out there. Now, when we look at the markets, because I think this is one of the big factors, this is a bit of the feedback loop to get us back to the why people feel so unsure about the current farm financial performance and the future farm financial performance. I think in this case, in May, has a lot to do with the markets. So when we asked you your outlook on selling crops, okay, so is now a good time to hold or a good time to sell? Okay, and we've been talking at RealAgriculture for the past few weeks that there's been a lot of hesitation, especially in Western Canada, for people to market their crop through production contracts because of the 2021 drought. There is some definite dry bias out there in some of the areas, and so people have been very unwilling to step out and market some of this crop. Now, when we look at the outlook on selling crops, so do I think the market's going up or do I think the market's going down? In September, okay, so at harvest last year, it was a 128 out of 200. We were thinking as a group the market was going higher, back to those spring 22 highs. If you fast forward to now, definitely feeling differently about which direction this market is headed. Farmers are saying 70. We have essentially cut our outlook on selling crops, which direction this market is going. It has essentially been cut in half. Okay, and maybe for good reason, based on if you look at some of the charts that are out there. Okay, so yes, the market's gone down. That's a deterioration of margin. That also shows up in terms of the current farm financial performance. So what's driving the future farm financial performance? And I think it comes down to the confidence. And this is maybe the graph that I don't know why. You can definitely disagree with me, but this is the part that I think I'm a little bit concerned about, is the fact that confidence in marketing crops is also on the decline. So here's why I think this is important. The market can go down, but you can still have confidence in what your strategy is to manage the risk in that environment. The market could be going up, and you could have high confidence. And we were there, I think, 2 years ago, right? The right strategy was grow it, bin it, hold it, and just wait for the market to go higher. It's easy to have confidence in that kind of environment. Right now, we're in a situation where I sympathize. I don't know which way this thing's going on most days. I can tell you that a lot of the commodity analysts have turned, a little bit bearish. A lot of people saying, "Hey, sell the rallies." But the farmer has lost their confidence in marketing the crop. So back in September, we were 104. We were essentially neutral. And since then, every survey, we have declined. This is as a group, as the farming community. We gotta figure out Even though the market's going down, how do we build that confidence? How do we build that confidence so we're able to steer through some of these really uneasy times when it comes to crop marketing? I think that's really the challenge. And, especially when we have a drought concern, it adds another layer of complexity in trying to do this. And to be honest with you, like if you think about just the province of Saskatchewan for a second, it makes sense. 2021 is very, very fresh, and that is showing up definitely in how people are viewing this current environment. So if you want more information on the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, there's a lot more there. I encourage you to go to realagristudies.com or send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. When we come back, we're going to continue with Real Ag on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Back to Real Ag on the Weekend. I think one of the big news stories of this week is this whole deal to merge Bunge and Viterra. It's raising a whole bunch of questions about how farmers and customers, how they're going to be impacted, what the operations of the combined company will look like. And remember, we're also talking from the U.S. side of the equation. Viterra recently acquired Gavilon. Now, for Saskatchewan, obviously, this is also the headquarters of Viterra, so there's a question about jobs in the city of Regina as well that are very much in question. So when it comes to the Canadian market, farmers and politicians are voicing concerns about decreased competition as both companies hold really varying degrees of ownership in grain elevators, oilseed crush plants, and port terminals that operate in overlapping markets in Western and Eastern Canada. Now, I would say, this is kind of a qualitative analysis here, but the farmer, at least the farmers that have provided feedback to me, I did an interview earlier this week on Ralco Radio asking about how farmers are impacted. The questions were very how severe are the consequences? I think the sentiment and the attitude towards this deal, right or wrong, are fairly inconcrete. Farmers are very negative about this agreement. What's difficult to sort out, though, is that negative towards consolidation in general, or is that actually specific to this deal? Competition Bureau of Canada will definitely have a say in what is to happen. Will that Bunge ownership in G3 be forced to be divested? What are are there consequences to that? Are there interested parties in that potential asset that happen? And sometimes the most interesting thing that happens out of the divestiture portion of a merger, or I should say, one of the most interesting things that happens when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, I think, is what are the pieces that have to be spun off in order to get through the Competition Bureau. In a great example, okay, think about the significance of this. Bayer Monsanto, okay? One of the big components of that was Bayer being forced to spin out their canola business, which was in vigor, and BSF they picked it up. And if you look at that deal all these years later, one may argue, without having, access to some of the numbers behind the scenes in terms of the PLs and all of this, but one may say that BSF was the real winner out of all that. BSF was the true winner out of that deal that went through. So does that sort of situation exist in this case? Time is going to tell. But farmers very, very against, I would say, this deal at this point. There is really not a lot of, I'm not getting a lot of emails saying, hey, this is a really good thing for farmers. And I wouldn't expect that you would, but I'm not getting a lot of emails to argue that side. So when we look at the Bunge stake in G3, the Competition Bureau has already indicated it will be reviewing the deal, which will include scrutiny of Bunge's stake. It's believed to be about 25% share, okay? So G3 was formed as a joint venture between Bunge and the Saudi Agricultural and Livestock Investment Company to buy the Canadian Wheat Board's assets in 2015. If I'm going to get emails about something, it's going to be this. In terms of that whole, depending on which side of the Wheat Board decision you're on, it really does remain to be seen how the Competition Bureau is going to review Bunge's stake in G3, as the threshold for significant interest in a company is not clearly defined in the Federal Competition Act. And that report is from Kelvin Hepner of RealAgriculture, who we're going to hear from in a little bit here on the show. The future of Viterra's Canadian headquarters in Regina, another thing very much up in the air. According to sources we've talked to, the combined company intends to maintain an important regional office presence in Regina, which, as I said, is the home of Viterra's Canadian headquarters. The deal values Viterra at approximately $8.1 billion and would see Viterra's shareholders, including Glencore and the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, they own about 30% of the combined company. Assuming the deal goes ahead, the combined company will be headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, with a board of directors consisting of 8 directors nominated by Bunge and 4 representing Viterra shareholders. The merger is expected to take about a year. That takes us to about mid-2024 for it all to be closed. And it does face some hurdles here in multiple countries. So we got Canada, the U.S., Australia, as well as Argentina. What I'm asking you is, do I have it wrong? Do you see some benefits in this happening? Do you think this is something that, is it just a case of there's some divestitures need to be made and it'll be fine? Or is this something that you feel should be a stop should be put to it in general altogether? I just really want to get a better assessment as far as how you, the farmer, feel about this deal happening. And your perspective, I think, is quite important in trying to assess this from the farmer's perspective. And we've been talking all week this week at Real Agriculture about what's worse, vertical versus horizontal consolidation. This would be horizontal. Some say that's actually worse than vertical. I've had a couple emails arguing the potential for actually it's the latter. So your feedback is great. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can find us across all the social media platforms, or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about the battle over interswitching and some of the changes that some farm groups believe needs to happen. The railways say not so fast. This is going to create a whole bunch of further problems for us as the railways and being able to serve customers abroad in a timely manner. We'll get the details from Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend. We're here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. Well, hey, now I'm joined by my colleague at Real Agriculture. It is Kelvin Hepner, based out of Altona, Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, thanks for joining us here on RealAg on the weekend.
Good to be here, Shaun. Hope everybody's having a good weekend.
Yeah, we could use some. I think the prairies could use a little bit more rain. That's the way I would probably put it in most parts. Would you agree with that?
I think you might be understating that because things are dry in a lot of areas, and there have been real spotty thunderstorms and showers move through some parts, but things are showing to me in the field around our area here. At least it's you can definitely see which areas got a shower, which didn't. You can even see where there were snow drifts into right before seeding season, because those areas of the crop is looking better than areas that were drier earlier.
Yeah. Wanted to chat with you today, Kelvin, about interswitching. There is a lot of lobbying happening right now in Ottawa between farm groups who want an extension of interswitching and the railways that are against a possible change. Why the disconnect? Why does it seem like both sides of this equation are so far apart on what's the best way to serve farmers going forward?
Well, because I think it's a business. There's a business case for both sides and clear benefits and disadvantages for both sides. So grain shippers and other shippers are, of course, in favor of interswitching, as it creates more of a competitive environment. It would force railways to compete in situations where you have a grain elevator that is only serviced by one railway, either CN or CP in all of Western Canada or all of Canada, and potentially the other railway would have access to or the ability to service an elevator that otherwise it wouldn't. So it kind of simulates a competitive environment through regulation. And right now the distance for interswitching, and traditionally it's been at 30 kilometers, which isn't very far. The proposal in the federal budget this year, it's a pilot project. They're talking about going to 160 kilometers. So this would also give BNSF, one of the main ways we might see this come to fruition is BNSF out of the US would have access and the ability to potentially service elevators and shippers that are within 160 points of an interchange, 160 kilometers of an interchange. And so that covers some of the southern prairies as well.
Yeah. So when
I didn't actually answer your question though. Railways don't want to do this because they see it as convoluted and making things more complicated, even though they do interswitching all the time when it's convenient for them. But railways have launched a major lobbying campaign, buying ads, and major lobbying effort in Ottawa as well in terms of trying to block this or make amendments to this bill, which it doesn't look like that's going to happen. It is moving through the Senate, but there's certainly been a lot of discussion and attention even in mainstream media on this interswitching issue.
Well, and maybe we should actually back up. For some people that aren't in the know here, what is interswitching?
Yeah, this is a kind of complicated concept. when you hear the word, it's not actually that complicated in practice, as it's a distance that under regulation railways are allowed to pull a shipment off of another company's railway. So, or if you're a shipper, you can apply to have a different railway provided, as long as you're within right now 30 kilometers of an interchange point where those rail lines meet. The government is looking to increase it to 160 kilometers, and grain shippers would actually like it to be much higher than that. 300 and some numbers, I believe, would cover most, or if not all, the grain elevators in Western Canada if interswitching was increased to that amount. And so by allowing access to a different and alternative railway, you have grain elevators that are currently serviced by a monopoly. They only have access to the railway that they're on. Interswitching potentially gives them access to another railway. And so it, again, simulates. The idea is to simulate a more competitive environment in rail shipping, and railways, of course, holding these monopolies in local markets don't see that as good for their business.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's sort of like this. Like every time we talk about the performance of railways, I always admit that I have a hard time piecing together the realities of what is like from a performance standpoint. We talk about, are the railways doing a good job, not doing a good job? The railway will say we're doing an excellent job. Ag Transport Coalition will say, oh, they're way behind, things are terrible. Somewhere in the middle always feels like kind of the reality. But it's very, very important that we find sort of that optimum apex of the railways. Obviously can be able to have a business case for functioning and running, and they can be, they can be successful, but also farmers are being serviced to a high level because we rely so much on railways as a mode of transport to get product from the countryside. If you're farming in Prince Albert or you're farming in Swift Current, to get that product from there to the coast. There's no river option. Plane is not an option. Driving it is not an option. And so this is why railway issues in Western Canada are just so uber critical, because the reliance on that service it's hard to even get a number around it, or I guess explain it to the significance that it plays.
Yeah, this is the balance that the government and regulators have to try to strike, because we're not going to see another several railways built in Western Canada where we would have a truly competitive environment. It's always going to be a duopoly, and even at best, it's a duopoly. In a lot of areas, it's a monopoly by either CN or CP, and so that requires regulation, and that's where interswitching is something that grain shippers would like to see more of. So the government has proposed a pilot project in this year's budget bill. It's a 18-month pilot, increasing the interswitching distance from 30 to 160 kilometers. That's the same distance that was temporarily implemented back in 2013-14 by the Conservative government, by the Harper Conservatives, when Jerry Ritz was the ag minister. They implemented extended interswitching as a measure to help alleviate the backlog back in the early teens. And so that's what the government is looking to re-implement now for 18 months. Grain shippers, though, the Ag Transport Coalition and others, Pulse Canada, groups that are part of the Ag Transport Coalition, they've actually asked for much more. They'd like to see this extended interswitching implemented for a minimum of 5 years so that you can actually test it and see it. Yeah. They say that would be a better test case, because even for 18 months, is a grain company going to upset their loan supplier for an 18-month period because they might get a slightly better rate from a different railway? 18 months might not be long enough to jeopardize some of those relationships. So that's one of their concerns. They actually I said 300 kilometers earlier. They'd like to actually see Ottawa increase the extended interswitching distance to 500 kilometers. That would likely cover all grain elevators in Western Canada to make them all eligible, even up in the Peace River or Carrot River areas where 160 isn't far enough to provide true access to both railways to some of those grain elevators in those areas.
What are the rules in the U.S.? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah, you're putting me on the spot. I could definitely dig that up, but off the top of my head, I don't know. And U.S. certainly has a less regulatory environment when it comes to railways.
Yeah,
more players. Not saying locally everywhere there's more players, but overall there's still how many major railways in the U.S.? There's still probably half a dozen, right?
Well, and if you're like farming in Montana or North Dakota, you just got the BN running through. It's not like we're talking about one railway. Like, there's a lot of railways in the U.S., but in certain corridors, there's one service provider. So a little bit different as well.
Exactly. Well, and it's the same as here, where a lot of areas you only have one option, and that's where interswitching aims to address that. And speaking of BN, again, BNSF is probably looking at this legislation, which is before the Senate right now, and looking forward to the opportunity to providing and competing for serving elevators that are within 160 kilometers of an interchange on the U.S. side of the border. So a lot of southern Saskatchewan could potentially fit into that, or some elevators in southern Saskatchewan could potentially fit into that range, increasing the competitiveness. And this is where there's concern. The railways say we don't want to outsource, or we don't want to give, like, one of the arguments against it is where it's going to give business to non-Canadian railways, to foreign railways. And so that's one of the arguments that the railways have been making to politicians in Ottawa.
Kelvin, thanks so much for shedding light on this very, very important topic. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Shaun.
That
Have a
is
good rest of the weekend, everyone.
Yeah, you too. That is Kelvin Hepner of Real Agriculture. Does great writing covering a lot of the news items on RealAgriculture.com. I don't know how many different stories he wrote this week, providing us with insight. So, Kelvin, one of the greats for sure. Hey, when we come back on Real Ag on the weekend, we are going to chat about what does Canada need when it comes to a national plan for trade infrastructure. We're going to talk about that when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
Before you get back in the field this year, spend some time with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Get all the information you need on hybrid selection, planting depth, crop inputs, and more from a wide range of industry experts. A massive library of video content is available on demand when you need it most. Spend your time outside of the field, inside the classroom, with the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com.
To Real Ag on the weekend. Hope you're having yourself a great Saturday. Coming up this next week, I'm giving you a bit of a prelude here. I'm going to be talking to Carlo Dade. Now, he is with the Canada West Foundation. Carlo spends a great deal of time at Canada West thinking about trade issues for Canada, and there are a lot of them. You think about Canada-US, you think about Canada-Europe, you think about Canada-Asia, and more specifically also Canada-China, of course. So he's looking at this from all of those sorts of angles. Now, one of the things when we talk about trade, a lot of times we talk about market access, we talk about market development, and making sure that we have places to send our products to. But if you back up a little bit earlier in the value chain, and we were talking last segment to Kelvin about interswitching and transport being an important component to making trade happen, right? If we can't get stuff to port, then we got a real problem. So one of the things that Carlo has is I would say not a pet project, like a real push that he has is that we need to really be thinking in Canada about a national trade infrastructure plan. Now, for some of you, when you hear national plan, it's probably going to create some anxiety. Now, when I talk to Carlo next week about this, he is going to argue that, Canada is really falling behind in this regard, especially when you compare it to some of our competitors, because they're actually looking at things from a more nationalistic perspective. So in the purest sense, the idea is the provinces and the feds get together. There is some sort of cost share. You can think like sort of like the business risk management or healthcare. There's a Fed Prov territorial cost share to those things. We get all the provinces and the feds together, and we start to lay out what are the priorities and how can we achieve some of our goals from a trade perspective through the lens of infrastructure. One of the things that Carlo talks about a lot is when we talk about infrastructure planning, talking about shovel-ready projects is a bad idea. Just because something is shovel-ready, it just means the application is finished. It doesn't mean that it's actually a strategic infrastructure build. And we've done a lot of things really, really piecemeal in the country of Canada when it comes to trade infrastructure planning. We do a little bit of this, we throw a little money there, or how about a little bit for you? And in some cases, the dots really don't connect. Okay? Like, maybe if we got everybody in the room, we'd actually figure out how we could load a grain ship at the Port of Vancouver while it's raining. There's something strategic we should think about. Just maybe one of the things. But when you look at it from a rail standpoint, you look at it from a road standpoint, do we have the infrastructure in place to actually make all the... And hey, I'll even throw in rural broadband. Because I think that's, more and more broadband, I think, in both Canada and the U.S. is looked upon as an infrastructure issue. Now, Starlink and Elon Musk are trying to sort of jump that and solve some problems, which is great to see. But I would put rural broadband in this discussion too. We have a sparse population across rural Canada for the most part, especially on the prairies. And so this topic is really important. And if you think about a lot of small towns across Saskatchewan and across the prairies in general, you throw in BC into that, basically across the country. Rural towns really rely on trade. I bet you there's some numbers out there that showcase how small towns, because of the rural component and maybe the oil and gas component, are much more reliant on trade than maybe in some of the urban centers. There's probably an economist listening to this that's like, what the heck is... And you probably have, if you do have some points on that or some data to back that up or counter that, definitely send me an email about that. So Carlo believes this needs to happen. Canada, to this point, doesn't really do this kind of stuff. I was on a panel with Dave Smarden from BioEnterprise and Carlo Dade going back to last year's Grow Canada. We had a panel and we talked about these kinds of things. And it would be to Canada's benefit. There was also, some data out this week about Canada's actually declining in its productivity, especially compared to the U.S. So GDP produced per capita, we're actually getting worse. Alberta is the only province that is actually above the U.S. state or the U.S. average. Alberta, even being the most productive province in the country, would still only be number 14 if it was a U.S. state. Still not very good. Ontario was equivalent to Alabama. Alberta was, I think, around Texas, and significantly, I think it was 25% less than the state of New York, and also behind California. So we have some work to do when it comes to productivity, and one of the ways, we decrease the people. Decreasing the population is not a good idea, but we need more GDP per capita in this country. And one of the ways we do that, because we are an export-reliant nation, is to increase trade. How do we do that? We need this trade infrastructure in place to facilitate it, to enable it to actually happen. Just because you say you want to increase trade doesn't mean it just magically appears out of thin air. You have to have the bones in place in order for it to happen. So I'm looking forward to talking to Carlo Dade next week about this very topic on RealAgriculture.com. Send me your thoughts about all that. What do you think? Could we actually get together and create a national trade infrastructure plan? Is that just too much of a tall order for us to get our ducks all in a row? Let me know. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Or you can call that RealAg feedback line. I want your feedback. You can call 855-776-6147. Want to thank everybody for listening to Real Ag on the weekend. Keep telling your friends about the show. It is great to be here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. Have yourself a great rest of your weekend, and we'll chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.